Welcome back to Prime Your Day and Prime Your Midlife. Today, we're talking about money, 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 money. And does that word trigger you already thinking it's good or bad? Well, I've got a real expert today on the psychology of money. Phill Holdsworth, it's good to see you today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for your invitation to join you today.
Well, it's a very important topic. And what do they say? Money does make the world go round. But I understand that you've got quite a lot of good and bad stories around money. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, certainly, Chris. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we start the interview always. I know we're going to dive into the money topic, but I understand that according to the statistics, you're probably not officially in midlife because you've sort of got over that hump. But we were talking about the fact that you never really felt as though you had a sort of a midlife crisis or a midlife period. What are your reflections on that, Phill?
It was interesting because when I look at other people and see what midlife crisis looks like for them, there's almost it's almost like two different people that you're dealing with, how they were and how they are now. And I can't say I went through that process of becoming two different people, but I certainly recognise that life can be, as to coin a phrase in football, a game of two halves, and and it's recognising what that first part is and what you learn from it. And I know for me, experiencing indebtedness was a biggie for me many years ago in that sort of first period of time, but also like probably everybody else, what influences their drivers for their careers, earning money, buying a house, family, things like this. Sorry. And all those things are drivers in our lives, aren't they? And what people perceive. And I suppose I was probably no different to anybody else. I perceived, having a career, successful career, earn lots of money, get married, buy a house, have a family, and all the pressures that brings in terms of, responsibilities and so on.
Okay, so do you consider that question that I put to people, midlife, being a mindset issue or a crisis issue in terms of how you face up to it?
Well, I personally think it's a mindset issue. And I would say that not just myself, but others that I've seen, it very much is a mindset issue, a realization that perhaps the things we were pursuing in our first part of life don't necessarily give us the promise, fulfill the promises that we thought they held. So, for example, money makes me happy. Well, how much money do we actually need to be happy? And actually, do we understand that happiness is a state of mind? So I was just saying to you earlier, I knew somebody who clearly hit the midlife crisis, and there was a realization that almost like wanting to relive their early lives and not do the things that they did before, but pursue the things they didn't pursue. And that was very clear in how they were living their lives. But I can't say I had that difference, but I learned some lessons.
Okay, but you obviously see a lot of people, and money and the ticking clock, when you face into this midlife period and you can see that the available time towards perhaps your retirement is now less than the working time that you've had, and if you're not where you believe your money destiny should be, can you see why that can manifest itself towards somebody thinking, I'm in crisis because I'm so far away from my expectation and time's running out?
I think you have to ask yourself the question, were my expectations realistic? None of us know what tomorrow will bring. And yes, it's good to plan, but it's also good to recognise, none of us know what tomorrow will bring. And although it's good to plan, it's also there's a need to go back and revisit those plans and modify those plans accordingly. And I think you find that more with people who realise that money doesn't always offer all the answers. So, for example, you get somebody working throughout their lives, have a great career, earn lots of money, buy a nice house, all of those things we mentioned earlier, and retire. And suddenly, who am I? What's my purpose in life? Where am I going? And money can't all answer those questions, because money is just an object that we use. And I say to my clients, I say to them that, money is a tool that you tell it what to do. It can't tell you what to do. And so if we put it in its wrong place, as though it's going to give us something back, yes, it can contribute to life's requirements and so on, or desires, emotional wants, but it can't actually address things that are fundamental to us. Who am I? What's my life purpose?
But is it fair to say, though, that our money story comes to us from perhaps societal norms or role model or family, on the basis that you can't or you shouldn't or we can't because of, and therefore even before you perhaps even become adolescent, 20s, 30s, you're already associated with a bad money story?
Quite possibly. I mean, clearly not everybody is, but at the end of the day, our journey through life, we do pick things up. They say that up to the age of 7, by that point, what we have experienced of money, and it might be what we've seen our parents, guardians, responsible others, how they've behaved with money, what they've said about money or not said about money. We've developed those beliefs and those habits at that stage. But all of us have experiences in life. And I mentioned earlier I'd been through a period of indebtedness. And that really does shake you when you've been at a point where you thought, I'm going to lose my house. How am I going to provide for my family? We can't even put food on the table. And you remember those emotional ties to that period of time. And when those come up, something happens and an unexpected bill comes in and suddenly you realise I don't have the money for it. Straight away there's triggers come in for some people, and so therefore they're remembering all those experiences, so they can have quite a negative impact. But equally, if we teach the next generation in the best way possible and help them become more self-aware as well, then actually we can put them in a more resilient position moving forward with their finances.
Okay, so I'm just curious about those 2 points you make there about a period of indebtedness. And I also have a certain affinity to a period of strife and anxiety associated with money. How did that happen first? And then most importantly, how did you free yourself from that period of anxiety, particularly with a lot of people currently facing a rising tide of increased costs and pressure from interest rates and fuel that are very much out of our control? Yeah. How did you lean into that particular experience, and how did you get out of it, Phill?
Okay, well, the present state or present day, they say that we haven't experienced this for nearly 50 years. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It's not a usual thing. For me, though, it was life circumstances and a bit of poor choices. So it's a combination of the two. More so life circumstances. I was made redundant 3 times in 2 years. And I had a young family. I got 3 daughters. And I was the main breadwinner. And so you could imagine what that must feel like, all of a sudden not having any income, and going through the sort of the normal processes, government departments and so on, and seeking benefits whilst you're in that out of work situation, but actually not being able to cover the costs, and then fearful about what the future might hold.
And do you think how did I get sorry to interrupt you, but it's an important question, because this is very much a midlife men's broadcast to a certain extent. Do you believe that there is a greater anxiety around the need to be perceived to be the breadwinner with men than there is perhaps with a female role model?
I think naturally built into men is the need to we're the hunter gatherers, and that's somehow inbuilt into our psyche as the male part, and I think for all men, not necessarily all men operate in that way. However, times are changing, and we've got what I keep hearing has been the modern man. So, for example, the man staying at home looking after the children while the wife goes or the partner goes to work and becomes the main breadwinner. So I think things are changing, but certainly I think a lot of men historically will find in themselves that intrinsic need to be the hunter-gatherer, the breadwinner, or so on, and perhaps put a lot of store in their identity is based in that. So if all of a sudden it's taken away from you, straight away you start to question your identity.
And do you think because of that we haven't had this sort of virtual reboot of an operating system that be Microsoft or your phone gets this upgrade and it says you must now upgrade? Because we haven't had that within ourselves, no matter how much we do believe that the modern man can be one or the other, is there a sense of pride and ego that gets in the way to say, well, yes, but actually, Chris, you do still need to be the hunter-gatherer, the primeval hunter because that's what we have been told, and over so many centuries, our brain is still prehistoric, thinking it hasn't had an upgrade yet, and it still believes inherently that that's what we're designed to do.
It's certainly some men believe that, and some men, I think, are much more balanced in their understanding of that, and not pulled so much in that way. So more embracing of, in this case, say the opposite sex, and the roles that we may play into society. I think society has a lot to say about, or a lot to answer for, in terms of historically how things have been, the men being the head of the house or whatever it might be. And although it's changing, we've still got generations who still carry that same mindset. And I would imagine as well that as a male in a career, we seem to be more intrinsically tied to our, what we do, giving us our identity, or what we earn, how much we earn, what kind of job we do, somehow adds to our identity. And when that comes taken away, or it's cut off, or we're all of a sudden prevented from doing so, then there's little wonder that some men, think, well, there's no point in going on. I'll end it all.
Okay, so let's just talk about your period of indebtedness, and I'm interested to see how you got out of it. But how long did it take you? If somebody else has listened to this and they're thinking, oh, maybe next week or something's going to come along, leaving it to luck and chance. How long did it take you to really take responsibility of the fact that things have to change?
In terms of me taking responsibility, that happened straight away.
Okay.
That's just who I am. And I know for other people, I worked for a charity where some of the people seeking our help would wait 3+ years. Now I get it, and the reason why I get it is because one of the things that I wanted to do was to look at what can I do to turn this situation around. So apart from getting another job, what can I do financially to turn this thing around? And so I actively looked at those things. But there came a point in that period where I needed to seek the help of another. And I went to an organisation called the Consumer Counselling Service, the Credit Consumer Counselling Service, I think it was. It's now Step Change.
Okay. But just before that point, do you think that the credit card companies, the banks, the interest-free, the pay now, pay later, the 12-month interest-free card, and then do you think that the way that we're set up enables us to fall into a trap?
It's interesting, isn't it? There is so much money to be made from debt. So what I would say to people listening is, you must remember, a bank, a credit card company, any loan provider are a business. They're not a public service. They're not there for your good. They're there to make money from your money. So including from your debt. So when you're in debt, your compound interest still goes on, but in a negative way, because your debt gets bigger and bigger. And the longer you wait, the bigger it becomes. And to you, the harder it becomes to deal with. So the sooner we seek help and advice, if we find that our ways of doing things are not really helping, then the better it is for us. And it's better for the experts then to assist us through the process to bring us out the other side. It took, I would say, several years for me to realize I needed the help of somebody else. And it only happened because one of those organizations you mentioned, a bank, actually decided, who had our account, just to pull the plug on the account, even though I'd gone to them with a plan. And my account manager at the time, used to have those, for those people who can still remember them, actually said to me, I wish there was more people like you. But they couldn't make the decision about it, had to go away and get authorization for the plan to be instigated. Didn't hear from them. Chased the bank. Eventually, a manager in the bank said, that account manager is no longer your account manager, and we're closing your account. And it was very cold how they did it. And basically that actually pushed me out of the banking, using the banking facilities. Mm-hmm. That is a very difficult place.
No, I mean, we're going to talk about how you got yourself out. But if somebody is suffering in silence, or they are, putting their proverbial head in the sand, is there something that relatives, family, friends can be looking out for that are some of the signals to say that somebody is in a money problem?
I think, yeah, certainly. Where somebody seems withdrawn, tends to isolate themselves more, seems somewhat out of sorts or out of character. Usually these are signs that something's going on, and it's good to ask questions, but not to ask questions like, what's the matter with you? Because immediately that person will shut down, and they'll just tell you whatever just to get you off their backs. But to actually say to them, look, you don't seem yourself. Is there something happening? Is there something I can help with? And be more empathetic. And I think it's crucial. And unfortunately, not everybody can be empathetic. But if they can find somebody who is more trustworthy to them, that they would feel more comfortable in being able to share with, then certainly within a family do that. In terms of a family observing things, oftentimes people say they withdraw. They withdraw from society, they withdraw from family, or there's more conflicts around money, particularly in a partnership. 1 in 4 relationships break down because of money conflict. Mental health in itself, when somebody's suffering, like depression or whatever it may be, can actually cause indebtedness, and indebtedness can cause somebody to go into a very depressive state. So if people see some of these signs going on, then it could well be that somebody's struggling and they need some help.
And when we compound that with some of the other things that are going on as we get older in life with men, in terms of hormone change, metabolic rate, and sleep, it can have a really stark consequence. So let's not be too morose. What are the simple steps, Phill, that we can try to take, or somebody listening now can take, by way of agencies or organizations or budgetary controls? What are the 3 top things that you think, just do this tomorrow if you're stuck?
If somebody's in that position where they're anxious about their finances, they're struggling financially, then I would certainly recommend them to contact. There's a number of organisations, from your Citizens Advice Bureau, I can say it, Step Change, Christians Against Poverty, Pay Plan, National Deadline. All of them have similar approaches, and some have slightly different approaches. So if people need that emotional support, people like Christians Against Poverty are great for that side.
And what happens when you contact these people? So let's say you've been plagiarized by letters and phone calls and things coming through the door, or even the threat of somebody knocking on the door. When you reach out for that hand of support, what happens then, Phill?
Well, let me tell you what doesn't happen. They don't judge you.
Oh, okay.
They don't condemn you. They never do any of that. They're very understanding. And these are the kind of people you really do need on your side, because they understand, they know and understand what it must feel like for you to be in that position, first and foremost. Secondly, they will ask you some questions, which may seem personal, but just to go with it, because they're there to help, not to hinder, not to condemn or put a barrier in people's way. They're actually there as the experts who can get you through a very difficult, or what to you feels like a very difficult time or period in your life, and to bring you out the other side. So work with them, answer their questions. But the best thing that people can do is, when they talk to these people, is actually have information to hand about their bills, their finances, their income, wherever there is some, or benefits, whatever it may be. But can I say, Chris, we're making assumptions that people who are anxious, stressed, depressed, or any of those things that might contribute to, say, a midlife crisis, are people who are struggling with their finances, when in actual fact, people who have got money can still feel just like that in that period of time. Don't assume that just because somebody is anxious about money, it's because they're struggling financially or in debt. I know people who are wealthy, multimillionaires, who are stressed to the eyeballs with
because they've got too much, or because they're worried of it being taken away, or because the machine that they're feeding is so big that they can't sustain it. Tell me more.
Well, you think about what we just said earlier about going back to the early stages of our sort of development and our experiences and lessons in life that we've learned. If you think about those things, if people have learned that you must save. I've had clients being told that by family members, relatives, parents, people like that, society. You must save. And they daren't spend any money on themselves because they feel guilty and ashamed if they do. Ridiculous. They've got to save, but they may not know or have a particular goal about what they're saving. They're just saving for the sake of it. And so they're hoarding this money. And then there's that fear of, what if I lose it all? And we conjure in our minds a picture of the world that might be, where we've lost it all, when in actual fact it's not happened, and we're not likely to necessarily. And so we find ourselves in that very anxious place. So that's people with money, and not just the ones who are struggling financially because of debt or worklessness or things like that.
I can't remember where I read it or where I listened to it, but there's certainly some data somewhere that says the happiest people in the world are actually found on in a fairly remote place with very little, but actually they're so present and so at one with the environment that they're in. They are the most happy because of the relationship and the environment that they have, and they haven't got a comparison theory of what they should or shouldn't have. They're just literally, as Paulo Coelho would say, they're living in the now.
Yeah.
And that's the lesson there that perhaps we need to take away from this, is that there is no other moment apart from this moment right now that matters.
Yeah. It's interesting, Chris, you should say that. I interviewed a good friend of mine a little while ago who'd returned from a sort of global trip. He'd actually spent, because of COVID, spent a longer period of time in Vietnam with his family than he'd anticipated. But it was interesting, my conversation with him. He started to tell me about how happy the people were, even though they had so little. And I said, would you come on my podcast? Because I want people to know and understand that and get this message that money can't give you happiness. You think it can, so you pursue it. And the more you pursue, the more you have to pursue. And so it's never enough, because you can't get that feeling, because happiness is a choice. It's the mindset that you choose to engage with, understanding the value of things around you. And the biggest values are other people, being connected to other people, being connected to your environment, appreciating what you have instead of always pursuing the things you don't have because the Joneses next door have it. And so therefore you feel you ought to have it. Or if you want to look successful, you need to dress in a certain way or drive a certain car or live in a certain house. And it's a nonsense.
Yeah.
And Western society is putting these pressures on people that actually are empty promises. And yet the people in these environments, like you referred to, and my friend from Vietnam refers to, these people got very little but are very, very happy.
So what is your purpose now then, Phill? Obviously you've got the psychology of money and you've got Aurum Gold. What would you say you're trying to do in terms of your money story and the people that you're working with?
It's a little bit like releasing people from prison.
Beautiful. I love that.
And giving them that sense of freedom. But it only comes by people understanding themselves better and what drives their relationship with money, what drives their choices and their behaviours. And so my purpose is to help people understand how do I relate to money? What are some of the beliefs, the mindsets that actually might be disempowering? They might actually sabotage my ability to achieve my, say, financial goals, because it's not taking away the fact that people can still have financial goals and use money, but it's actually having it in a right perspective. But understanding those mindsets that may actually trip us up at times. So, for example, people who are spontaneous are likely to just go and spend some money on something they've seen. Oh, I've always wanted one of those, I'll just buy it. And then go away and feel really guilty because they know, I've done it again, haven't I? I've spent more than I anticipated, and it's left me short over here.
Yeah.
And so it's helping people understand why they do these things and what can they do to protect themselves so that they're much more of a balanced approach to finances, and that it's not that driver alone that they recognise. Like you talk about the second half of life, you recognise what's really important in your life.
Well, I was just about to get to that question. I'm conscious of time for other people that might be listening. So you had this career, 25 years in the financial services industry. Looking back now from sort of 60 back, how many mountains do you think you've climbed, and how many do you think you've got ahead of you in terms of this metaphoric, I'll go up and then I'll come down, and I maybe had some trauma or a period of reflection? How many have you climbed, and do you think you're happy now?
I'm certainly happier now because I'm not pursuing some things. Like, for example, I'm not geared to titles and possessions and
did you have
money.
to climb the mountain for you to understand that satisfaction isn't driven by that pursuit?
Yeah, I did, because until you actually learn, the fact that some of these things have these empty promises. When things don't go so well, where is everybody? The people who have got the money and they flash the money around, they've got lots of friends, but the minute they're not doing that, where are all the friends gone? And you start to realise, actually, there's more to life than all of these things. And can I find happiness and fulfillment in other ways? And that was my sort of, learning process in my first mountain. I don't know how many mountains, but certainly the mountain I'm on at the moment, I am happy, but that's not without its challenges. And can I apply the things I've learned in my own life? Because if not, then I shouldn't be a voice around this area.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you just to think. I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I didn't give you any prep for this. I want you to think about 3 money takeaways that people can take from you as an expert on money. And you have been through, the foothills and the growth on money. And while you think about that, the way to engage with Phill is to go to the website, which is Aurum Gold Limited, and it's AURUM Gold, as you can see on the Zoom screen if you're watching, aurumgoldlimited.co.uk, or look him up on LinkedIn. He's also got the Wisdom Chat podcast, which is a fascinating listen. I think you might even find me on it in the future talking about some money solutions. So, Phill, I would appreciate your time and also really your transparency around your own money story. What are the 3 things that you think somebody listening today who's either got lots or got nout, what do you think their money lessons should be?
I think first and foremost, have a plan. Everybody should have a plan, because a plan has a massive impact in reducing our stress and anxiety around money. So how do you know how to get somewhere unless you know where you're starting from? So that's number 1. I think number 2 is being willing to ask for help. We're not islands, and it's finding people that we can trust, that we can share these things with. And number 3, money is not a dirty word. Money isn't the root of all evil. That's a misquoted passage from the Bible, that money, the love of money, is the root of all evil. So, and that's the drive. And you see it in business, you see it in the world, in world's economies and in government, seeking power and wealth, how it can corrupt if they're pursuing it for the wrong reasons. So those are the 3 takeaways: is recognizing I must have a plan to reduce my stress and anxiety. What did I say?
Ask for help.
Yeah, ask for help. And then also number 3, recognize that we can talk about money. It's not a dirty word, but find people that you can trust. So if you want to bounce things around or even ask for help, then you need to be able to talk to other people. Don't try and just be an island and suffer in silence.
Well, Phill, I want to appreciate you. And at the end of the day, you can go to lots of people, but I always think it's good to go to somebody that's been through the quagmire and the valley that you might find yourself in, because they can show you just the first ladder, the first rung that you can take to get out of where you're at. And when you can see the first step, he can then hold your hand and take you on the next journey out of that quagmire. But the most important thing is to not flounder around, because you can get really stuck. Phill, it's been a real pleasure sharing the screen with you today. And any closing words?
No, just to say thank you very much, Chris. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I really appreciate being with you today.
Thank you so much. This has been another episode of Prime Your Day, Prime Your Midlife. Remember, there is only one life, so love life, living life.